The Vorthic hegemony had conquered 17 star systems. Before they learned what true horror looked like, Admiral Krextai stood before the holographic display aboard the Eternal Dominion, watching his fleet's scanners paint impossible readings across the tactical grid. 12 hours ago, their dimensional probe had pierced through to what their xenobiologists called sector designation, Terra 7743, a backwater system with a single inhabited world, whose primitive electromagnetic signatures suggested they'd barely mastered nuclear fission. It should have been another routine harvesting operation. The Vorthic had perfected the art of dimensional warfare over 3 millennia, opening rifts into alternate realities to strip mine resources and enslave populations. They'd grown fat on the spoils of 10,000 conquered Earths, each one falling within standard cycles as their primitive militaries crumbled before Vorthic plasma rays and gravity weapons. But Terra 7743 was different. Sir? Communications Officer Velthara's voice carried an undertone of unease that made Krextai giddy and bristle. The probe signals, they've changed. The humans are transmitting on frequencies we've never encountered. On the main display, Earth hung like a blue-green marble wrapped in storms of electromagnetic interference. But the interference wasn't random, it pulsed with deliberate, aggressive patterns that made the ship's AI system stutter and glitch. Played the transmission. Krextai ordered, his forearms clasping behind his back in parade rest. Static fill. The bridge then resolved into something that made every Vorthic present freeze in primitive terror. It wasn't words, it was pure violence translated into sound. The screams of dying machines, the roar of weapons that shouldn't exist, and underneath it all, something that might have been laughter if laughter could kill. In transmission, Krextai snapped, but his communications officer was already diving for the controls, mandibles clicking in distress. Admiral, Science Coordinator Nithver approached with data slate clutched in trembling claws. The dimensional readings, they don't match any of our previous Earth variants. This reality's humans appear to have been engaged in warfare for the past 4 centuries. Continuous warfare. Their technology isn't just primitive, it's purpose-built for killing. The hologram flickered, showing radar signatures rising from Earth's surface like angry wasps. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. Impossible, Krextai muttered. Their industrial capacity couldn't support, sir. Sensor technician Kildan S. Carapace had gone pale gray. New contacts emerging from their moon's shadow. Multiple fleet formations, each larger than our entire armada. The tactical display exploded with red markers. Ships that defied every principle of engineering the Vorthic understood vessels. That looked like they'd been forged in the hearts of dying stars. Their hulls scarred by battles that should have destroyed them a dozen times over. They moved with predatory grace, arranging themselves in formations that spoke of experience earned through blood and fire. Then the first human transmission came through, clear as crystal and cold as vacuum. This is Admiral Lassacairn of the Terran Hell Fleet, 14th Expeditionary Force. You've opened an unauthorized rift into sovereign human space. You have exactly 1 minute to withdraw your probe and seal your breach, or we will consider this an act of war. Krextai's mandibles spread in what passed for a smile among his species. 1 minute. These primitives thought they could dictate terms to the hegemony. Open a channel. He commanded. Let me explain to these humans exactly how insignificant they are. But as he began to speak, more ships kept materializing from Earth's dark side. Ships with names that made his translators hesitate before rendering them into Vorthic. Ragnarok's Edge, Bone Harvester, Iron Requiem, Final Testament. Each one bristled with weapon arrays that hurt to look at directly, as if they bent light around them through sheer malevolence. 59 seconds, Admiral Cairn's voice carried across the void, and somehow it sounded like she was smiling too. The timer on Krextai's display showed 58 seconds remaining, and for the first time in his military career, the Admiral of the Eternal Dominion felt something he'd forgotten existed. Doubt. Because the humans weren't backing down. They weren't even trying to negotiate. They were just waiting. Krextai let the timer run down to 0 out of principle. The humans struck before the last digit faded. It wasn't the measured tactical engagement the Vorthic expected. There was no posturing, no preliminary skirmishes, no gradual escalation. The human fleet simply opened fire with every weapon they possessed, turning local space into a storm of destruction. That made Krextai's sensory organs shut down in self-preservation. Evasive maneuvers. He screamed, but his crew was already throwing themselves at their stations. The Eternal Dominion lurched sideways as something that might have been a missile punched through their primary shields like they were made of paper. On the tactical display, chaos reigned. Human ships moved like they were insane, diving straight into vortic formations without regard for their own survival. The Bone Harvester ran through 3 hegemony cruisers in sequence, its hull somehow absorbing impacts that should have vaporized it. Energy readings from the human vessels spiked beyond the upper limits of vortic sensors. What are their weapons made of? Nithra demanded, staring at readings that made no sense. These energy signatures they're using antimatter containment fields as projectiles. The first vortic casualty was the heavy cruiser Dominance Absolute. A human weapon, something the sensors couldn't even classify, struck it amidships and simply erased a 100-meter section of hull. Not vaporized, not destroyed, erased. As if that section of reality had been edited out of existence. Return. Fire. All batteries. HFY commanded. The hegemony fleet responded with coordinated barrages of plasma and gravity weapons that had leveled entire worlds. The attacking force should have been annihilated. Instead, the humans danced through the bombardment like they'd done this before, like they'd spent centuries learning exactly how to fight enemies with superior technology. A human destroyer, its hull already glowing from multiple impacts, performed a maneuver that violated 3 laws of physics. It spun end over end while maintaining forward momentum, bringing fresh weapon batteries to bear while its damaged sections cooled in the shadow of its own hull. The resulting fusillade crippled the vortic escorts and left the third drifting powerless. Their pilots, Kildan whispered, staring at his sensors. Sir, their reaction times are impossible. They're responding to our fire before we've finished targeting. Combat drugs, HFY said, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd seen drug soldiers before. This was something else. This was artistry. The human flagship, a massive dreadnought that sensor readings said shouldn't exist, carved through the center of the vortic formation like a predator through prey. Its weapons weren't just destructive, they were creative. One beam turned a hegemony frigate's armor into some kind of acid that began eating the ship from the outside in. Another transformed a section of space into what looked like liquid fire that clung to anything it touched. Admiral Cairn is hailing us, Velthara reported, her voice tight with strain. On screen, the human admiral appeared in the hologram, and HFY felt his secondary heart skip beats. She looked like she'd been carved from steel and fed on violence. Scars traced patterns across features that might have been beautiful if they weren't so absolutely pitiless. Her uniform was pristine despite the chaos around her, and when she smiled, it was the expression of something that had forgotten how to feel mercy. I gave you 60 seconds, she said conversationally, as if they were discussing weather instead of the systematic destruction of his fleet. You chose poorly. Behind her, HFY could see the human bridge crew working with mechanical precision. No panic, no shouted orders. They killed with the same casual efficiency most species use for routine maintenance. You don't know what you're facing, HFY snarled. The hegemony has conquered 1,000 worlds. We've destroyed species that had existed for millions of years. Admiral Cairn's smile widened. And we've been at war with ourselves for 400 years straight. Every tactic you know, every strategy you've perfected, every weapon you've developed, we've already used it against each other and found 17 different ways to counter it. Another vortic ship exploded on the tactical display. The thing about humans, Cairn continued, her voice carrying over the sound of dying ships, is that we never stop learning how to kill each other, and we never, ever forget a lesson written in blood. The transmission cut, and HFY stared at the tactical display where his proud fleet was being systematically dismantled by forces that moved like dancers and struck like hammers forged. In hell itself, 13 minutes into the battle, half his ships were gone. Fall back to minimum safe distance, HFY commanded, watching his fleet's formation crumble like ancient paper. The tactical display painted a nightmare in red, and amber 23 hegemony vessels destroyed or crippled, while the human fleet seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. The Eternal Dominion shuddered as something struck her starboard armor, and HFY could hear the whole plating scream under stress. Emergency klaxons wailed throughout the ship while damage control teams rushed to seal breaches. That shouldn't have been possible with their advanced shielding, sir. Nithra called out from his station, kite pale with shock. The humans aren't just attacking randomly. They're learning each engagement. They adapt their tactics to our responses faster than our computers can calculate optimal counters. On the main display, a human heavy cruiser demonstrated exactly what the science coordinator meant. The Iron Requiem dove into a crossfire from Vorthic destroyers, absorbing punishment that should have reduced it to stellar dust. But instead of breaking apart, the ship's armor began reconfiguring itself, developing specialized sections that deflected plasma beams and absorbed gravity waves. Within minutes, it had adapted to every weapon type in the hegemony arsenal. Impossible. Krextai breathed. Metal doesn't evolve. Theirs does, Kildan reported, his sensors painting readings that violated everything they knew about materials. Science, sir. Their ships, they're not just machines. There's organic components integrated throughout their hulls. They're literally breeding better armor in real time. The human fleet had begun a new phase of their assault. Instead of the chaotic melee that had characterized the opening engagement, they moved with surgical precision, formations of 3. The 5 ships would isolate individual Vorthic vessels, then systematically strip away their defenses layer by layer while studying their responses. It was worse than destruction. It was vivisection, emergency transmission to Hegemony High Command. Krextai ordered. Priority Alpha. Request immediate reinforcement from the 4th and 7th fleets, sir. Velthara's voice cracked with strain. The dimensional rift is changing. The humans are doing something to it. The holographic display zoomed in on the space-time tier they'd opened to reach this reality. What had been a stable portal was now pulsing with malevolent energy, its edges flickering with patterns that hurt to perceive directly. Human ships had surrounded it, their weapons trained not on the Vorthic fleet, but on the rift itself. They're weaponizing our own breach, Nithra said in horror. If they destabilize it while we're still here, the sentence died as the implications hit. A collapsing dimensional rift would drag everything nearby into null space, a realm where matter simply ceased to exist. Withdraw to emergency jump coordinates. Krextai commanded, signal all vessels to prepare for emergency translation. But as the surviving Vorthic ships began their retreat, the humans revealed another nightmare. The sleek destroyer Final Testament had been quietly maneuvering during the battle, and now it unleashed a weapon that defied classification. A beam of something that wasn't quite energy, and wasn't quite matter struck the fleeing hegemony transport, resource acquisition, and instead of destroying it, the weapon began rewriting its fundamental structure. The transport's hull sprouted growths that looked disturbingly organic. Weapon ports sealed themselves while new ones opened in impossible configurations. Within minutes, the ship had transformed into something that no longer registered as Vorthic technology. Then it opened fire on its former allies. They're not just defeating us. Krextai realized with growing horror. They're converting our ships, our crews. On the communications channel, screams echoed from the transformed vessel, Vorthic voices crying out in languages that predated their civilization, speaking words that seemed to burn the air itself. Then the voices changed, becoming something else entirely, something that laughed as it killed. Admiral, Velthara whispered, we're receiving a transmission from the converted ship. It's Commander Yixavel. The image that appeared on screen made Krextai's blood freeze. What had been his subordinate was still recognizably Vorthic, but changed in ways that suggested evolution guided by pure malevolence. Yixavel's carapace had developed new segments that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and his eyes held an intelligence that was vast and utterly alien. Thank you. The thing that had been Yixavel said, its voice harmonizing with itself in impossible ways. Thank you for opening the door. We've been waiting so long to meet our creators. The transmission cut, and the converted ship began broadcasting on all frequencies a signal that made every piece of Vorthic technology on the battlefield begin to malfunction and change. Emergency jump, Krextai screamed. All ships, emergency jump now. But as the Eternal Dominion's translation drive spun up, Admiral Cairn's voice cut through their communications one final time. Running won't help, she said, and somehow she sounded sad, almost pitying. You've seen us now. You know we exist, and we never forget an enemy. The dimensional jump engaged, and the surviving Vorthic fleet fled into the safety of null space, leaving behind a third of their number, and all of their certainty about humanity's place in the universe behind them. In the human reality designated Terra 7743, Admiral Cairn watched the rift begin to stabilize under human control. Begin Phase 2, she ordered quietly. The Hegemony High Command received Admiral Krextai's report in the crystal chambers, beneath Vorthic Prime, where the Council of Domination had ruled unchallenged for 3,000 years. The holographic recreation of the battle played across the chamber's walls in stark, brutal detail. Supreme Overlord Dexmerin watched with growing disbelief as human ships danced through superior firepower like predators playing with prey. When the recording reached the conversion of the resource acquisition, his primary mandibles clicked in unconscious distress. Impossible, declared War Prime Ketfox, his scarred carapace bearing the trophies of 100 conquered worlds. No species developed such tactics without extensive contact with dimensional warfare. These humans are primitives. These humans, HFY corrected grimly, have been engaged in total warfare for centuries. They've weaponized everything: physics, biology, information itself. They don't just fight, they innovate destruction. Fleet Commander HFY stepped forward, her tactical displays painting scenarios across the chamber. The dimensional rift remains active under human control. They've reversed the polarity, turning it into a beachhead. Our scouts report human vessels beginning probe missions into our reality. The implication struck the Council like a physical blow. In 3 millennia of dimensional warfare, no conquered species had ever managed to turn their tactics against them. The rifts were supposed to be one-way passages, opening only from hegemony-controlled space. Mobilize the Grand Armada, Supreme Overlord Dexmerin commanded. 500 vessels. We'll crush them through overwhelming force, sir. HFY's voice carried a warning born of bitter experience. I don't think you understand what we're facing. These aren't random primitives who stumbled onto advanced technology. They're apex predators who've spent centuries perfecting the art of warfare. Every engagement teaches them something new about how to kill us more efficiently. The Supreme Overlord's response was cut short as alarms began wailing throughout the command center. Emergency lighting bathed the crystal chamber in harsh amber as tactical displays erupted. With impossible readings, contact, Fleet Commander. HFY's voice cracked with disbelief. Multiple human vessels emerging from null space directly above Hegemony Prime. The main display showed a sight that would haunt Vorthic nightmares for generations. 3 human ships hung in orbital space above their capital world. Their hull configurations unlike anything from HFY's earlier reports. These vessels were larger, more organic in appearance, and radiated energy signatures that made Vorthic's sensors stutter and fail. How? War Prime Ketfox demanded. Our dimensional barriers are impenetrable. His answer came in the form of Admiral Cairn's voice, broadcast across every communication channel on Vorthic Prime simultaneously. Your barriers work on the assumption that dimensional travel requires massive energy expenditure, she explained, with the patience of a teacher addressing particularly slow students. But what if we told you that consciousness itself is dimensional? That organic neural networks can navigate null space the same way they navigate dreams? One of the human ships began descending toward the planet's atmosphere. As it moved, the vessel's hull rippled and changed, growing heat dissipation fins and atmospheric control surfaces in real time. It wasn't just adapting, it was evolving for planetary assault. We didn't come here to conquer your world, Admiral Cairn continued. We came to study you, to understand how you think, how you fight, how you die. Consider this a field lesson. The descending ship opened weapon ports that vomited forth something that shouldn't exist, projectiles that bent space around themselves, creating localized gravity wells that pulled Vorthic orbital defense platforms into crushing embrace. Defensive arrays that had protected the capital for millennia simply imploded under stresses that rewrote local physics. Launch all defensive squadrons, Dexmerin commanded. Activate planetary shields. But as the hegemony's response began, the other human vessels demonstrated why the first ship had been allowed to descend unopposed. They began broadcasting on frequencies that interfaced directly with Vorthic neural patterns, transmitting data that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to primitive brain stems. Within minutes, half the defensive crews were immobilized by feedback loops that convinced their nervous systems they were already dead. The remaining squadrons that managed to launch found themselves facing opponents who had spent 4 hours studying their tactical responses from the previous engagement. Every maneuver the Vorthic pilots attempted was anticipated and countered before they completed it. Human fighters, if they could be called fighters, moved like living things, their weapons adapting mid-flight to whatever defensive measures their targets employed. Squadron Commander Vector, veteran of 30 campaigns, lasted 4 to 7 seconds against a single human interceptor before his ship was converted into something that began hunting his own wingmates on the planet's surface. The descended human vessel had begun what could only be described as architectural surgery. Its weapons didn't destroy Vorthic cities, they redesigned them, transforming defensive installations into twisted sculptures that served some incomprehensible human purpose. Buildings flowed like liquid, their structures reorganizing according to patterns that hurt to contemplate. Sir, Zelxari reported, her voice hollow with shock. The converted structures, they're transmitting, broadcasting on quantum frequencies we can't block. The transmission resolved into human voices, dozens of them, speaking in perfect harmony as they dissected Vorthic military doctrine in real time. Infantry, tactics, rigid hierarchical command structure creates predictable response patterns. Recommend exploitation through selective leadership elimination and communications disruption. Naval doctrine, over-reliance on energy shielding creates vulnerability to matter phase weapons and dimensional displacement attacks. Psychological profile, species-wide superiority complex results in tactical inflexibility and poor adaptation to novel threats. Each analysis was followed by practical demonstrations as human forces systematically dismantled. 3,000 years of military tradition in the space of hours. They're not just defeating us, Krextai said quietly, watching his species' greatest achievements reduced to object lessons. They're teaching us exactly how helpless we are. Supreme Overlord Xmarin's response was interrupted as every screen in the command center displayed Admiral Cairn's face. She looked tired now, almost bored. We've learned enough, she announced. Thank you for the educational opportunity. We'll be withdrawing now, but don't worry, we'll be back. We always come back. The human ships began their ascent, leaving behind a capital world whose every defensive installation had been converted into a monument to human ingenuity. And in the quantum transmissions they left behind, a single message repeated endlessly, we know where you live now. The Grand Armada of the Vorthic hegemony assembled in the contested space, near the dimensional rift 6 cycles after the humiliation at Vorthic Prime. 500 vessels of the line, supported by twice that number of escorts and auxiliaries, formed a wall of steel and plasma that stretched across half the star system. Fleet Marshal Grixathane stood aboard the massive dreadnought Hegemony's Wrath, his forearms spread wide as he surveyed the greatest military force his species had ever assembled. Behind him, the bridge crew worked with grim efficiency, preparing for what High Command had designated as the final solution to the human problem. Sir, reported Tactical Coordinator Jexavin, dimensional sensors detect massive human fleet, movements on the far side of the rift, estimated strength, uncertain. Their ships are generating interference patterns that confuse our scanning rays. Grixathane's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Let them come. No matter how clever these humans thought they were, they couldn't match the raw firepower of 1,000 hegemony vessels. This would be the decisive engagement that restored their species' reputation. The rift pulsed, and hell came through. The first wave wasn't ships, it was weapons. Projectiles that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, each one carrying payloads that rewrote local physics on impact. The outer screening formations of the Grand Armada found themselves dealing with gravity wells that inverted randomly, antimatter that behaved like conventional explosives, and energy beams that converted matter into information and broadcast it as static. Evasive maneuvers, Grixathane commanded, but his fleet was too massive to maneuver quickly. The human weapons had been designed specifically to exploit this weakness. Then the ships began emerging, where the earlier human fleet had numbered in dozens. This armada contained thousands, but these weren't the sleek predators Krextai had faced. These vessels looked like they'd been grown rather than built, their hulls incorporating technology that seemed to blend multiple species' capabilities into unified weapons platforms. Sir, Jexavin's voice cracked with disbelief. I'm reading Vorthic energy signatures mixed with human technology. Those ships, some of them are built using our own vessels as components. The tactical display painted a picture of nightmare as converted hegemony ships, their hulls bearing organic modifications that pulse with bioluminescent patterns, took positions alongside pure human vessels. The resource acquisition transformed beyond recognition during the first encounter, led a squadron of similarly converted craft in a flanking maneuver that utilized Vorthic tactical doctrine with human technological enhancements. Open fire. Grixathane commanded, all batteries, maximum dispersal pattern. The Grand Armada unleashed a barrage that could have sterilized a planet. Thousands of plasma beams and gravity torpedoes crossed space in coordinated waves, creating a killing field that should have obliterated any opposing force. The human response was elegant in its brutality. Instead of attempting to evade the barrage, the converted ships moved directly into it, their hybrid hulls absorbing the energy and converting it into something else entirely. Within seconds, the weapons that had been meant to destroy them were being redirected back at their sources with interest. The heavy cruiser Dominion's edge took a direct hit from its own reflected plasma cannon and simply vanished. Its matter translated into pure energy that fed the human fleet's power systems. "They're using our own weapons to fuel their advance," HFY reported, his sensors painting readings that defied comprehension. "Sir, we need to fall back and regroup." But HFY had been chosen for this command specifically because he never retreated. All ships close to knife fighting range deny them room to maneuver. The order was tactical suicide, but the hegemony fleet obeyed. Hundreds of vessels plunged into close combat with an enemy that had spent for centuries perfecting the art of brutal, intimate warfare. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a dissection. Human ships moved through the Vorthic formations like living things, their weapons adapting to each target individually. The destroyer Blood Harmony performed a maneuver that seemed to violate causality, appearing behind 3 different hegemony cruisers simultaneously and delivering killing strikes that left their targets drifting with perfect circular holes through their command sections. Admiral Cairn's flagship, the inevitable consequence. DEMONST or ADEDY, the human fleet had evolved organic components. As Vorthic weapons struck its hull, the damage seemed to heal itself, but each repair made the ship stronger rather than simply restoring it. Armor that had been breached developed redundant layers. Weapon systems that had been damaged spawned additional barrels. "Sir," Communications Officer Raxdell screamed over the chaos. "The converted ships are broadcasting surrender terms to our crews. They're offering to transform our people instead of killing them on the tactical display." Entire sections of the hegemony fleet were going dark as their crews accepted human mercy. The transformed vessels immediately turned their weapons on former allies, adding their firepower to the human assault. HFY watched his carefully planned formation collapse into chaos as ship after ship either exploded or joined the enemy. The hegemony's wrath shuddered under impacts from weapons that seemed designed specifically to target their class of dreadnought. "How many?" he asked quietly. "Sir, how many ships have we lost?" HFY's silence stretched for several seconds. Before he answered, 237 destroyed, sir. 118 converted. The rest are requesting permission to withdraw. In less than 2 hours, the greatest fleet in Vorthic history had been reduced to scattered survivors fleeing for their lives. "Sir," Raxdell's voice was barely a whisper, "Admiral Cairn is hailing us." The human admiral appeared on screen, and HFY could see the bridge of her flagship behind her. What had been technological sterility was now a blend of machinery and organism, with crew stations that seemed to respond to their operators' thoughts rather than their commands. "Fleet Marshal HFY," she said, and somehow she knew his name despite never having met him. "You fought well. Your species has potential." "Potential for what?" HFY snarled. Admiral Cairn's smile was neither cruel nor kind, it was simply inevitable. Evolution. The emergency session of the Council of Domination convened in the deepest vaults, beneath Vorthic Prime, where the species' most ancient weapons lay dormant in stasis fields. Supreme Overlord Thexmerin stood before the Extinction Archive, his kindness form dwarfed by devices that had ended entire civilizations. "Activate the null cascade generator," he commanded, his voice echoing off walls carved from solid neutronium. "If we cannot defeat them conventionally, we'll erase them from existence itself." War Prime Kefox raised a trembling claw in protest. "Sir, the null cascade has never been tested on a dimensional scale. If we miscalculate, we could destroy both realities. Better extinction than submission," Thexmerin replied coldly. "These humans have shown us the future they offer conversion into their twisted hybrid slaves. I choose oblivion first." The ancient weapon stirred to life, its crystalline matrix beginning to resonate with frequencies that predated the current universe. Built by the Vorthic's predecessors as a final resort against an enemy lost to history, the null cascade could theoretically unravel space-time itself, reducing entire star systems to probability clouds. But as the weapon charged, alerts began cascading through the command center's displays. "Sir, Fleet Commander HFY's voice carried pure terror. Human ships are materializing throughout hegemony space, not just near the rift, everywhere. Every major system, every colony world, every strategic installation, the tactical displays painted a picture of impossible scope. Humanity hadn't just learned to navigate dimensional barriers, they perfected the art. Their fleets were appearing simultaneously across 1,000 light-years of Vorthic territory, each one perfectly positioned for maximum strategic impact on Vorthic Prime's orbital stations. Converted ships that had once belonged to the hegemony were docking with casual confidence. Their cruise beings that had once been purely Vorthic but now bore the organic modifications that marked human influence walked through security checkpoints with biological implants that made conventional weapons useless. The humans aren't invading, HFY reported with growing horror. They're integrating every world they've touched. The populations are volunteering for conversion. They're not being conquered, they're being recruited. Supreme Overlord Thexmiran watched the reports with growing disbelief. On screen after screen, Vorthic citizens were embracing transformation, their bodies adapting to incorporate human biotechnology that promised enhanced capabilities and extended lifespans. Why? He demanded. Why would our people choose this? His answer came from an unexpected source. Fleet Commander HFY stepped forward, and Thexmiran noticed for the first time the subtle changes in her chitin coloration. The new neural ports behind her sensory organs, because they showed us what we could become, she said, her voice harmonizing with itself in impossible ways. For centuries of warfare has taught them that the strongest species aren't those who destroy. They're enemies, they're those who transform them into allies. The Supreme Overlord reached for his ceremonial weapon, but HFY moved with inhuman speed, her modified nervous system processing information faster than Vorthic reflexes could respond. The conversion isn't forced, she continued, gently, restraining him with strength that suggested significant physical enhancement. It's offered. Those who accept it retain their memories, their personalities, their essential selves. They just expand, become part of something larger. Around the chamber, other council members began displaying similar modifications. The integration had been happening gradually, through voluntary contact with human representatives who had approached them not as conquerors but as teachers. The null cascade, Thexmiran said desperately. I could still activate it, destroy both our species, rather than submit to this abomination. Admiral Cairn's voice spoke from speakers throughout the chamber. You could, but then you missed the best part. The holographic projectors activated, showing Thexmiran something that made his secondary heart stop. It was Vorthic Prime, but not as it could be. Cities that blended hegemony architecture with organic human technology, creating structures that were simultaneously alien and familiar. Vorthic citizens moving through environments that had been enhanced rather than replaced, their bodies bearing modifications that clearly improved their capabilities without erasing their essential nature. We didn't come to destroy your civilization, Admiral Cairn said, materializing in the chamber through what appeared to be a controlled teleportation effect. We came to evolve it. Humans have been at war for 400 years because we learned something important. The only way to truly defeat an enemy is to make them into a friend. She gestured to the displays showing hegemony space. Every species you've conquered, every world you've stripped mine, every civilization you've enslaved, they're all still out there, waiting, and they're angry. Your empire is surrounded by enemies who hate you with the passion of the oppressed. Thexmiran's mandibles clicked in understanding. You're offering alliance. We're offering evolution, Admiral Cairn corrected. The choice isn't conquest or extinction. It's stagnation or growth. Your people have already started choosing. The Supreme Overlord looked around the chamber at his transformed council, at the displays showing voluntary integration across his empire, at the future humanity was offering instead of the destruction they could have chosen. His hand moved slowly away from the null cascade's activation controls. What do we become? Admiral Cairn's smile was the first genuinely warm expression he'd ever seen from a human. Something better than either of us could be alone. 5 years after first contact, the entity that had once been the Vorthic hegemony and was now simply called the Alliance stood ready to face its first major test. The Kreshtai Collective, a machine intelligence that had consumed 17 galaxies, had finally noticed the anomalous readings from what they previously dismissed as a backwater spiral-armed. Admiral Cairn, her body now bearing subtle Vorthic modifications that enhanced her natural human capabilities, stood on the bridge of the synthesis, a vessel that embodied everything the Alliance had become. Its hull was simultaneously organic and mechanical, featuring technologies from dozens of species that had chosen evolution over extinction. Beside her, Supreme Coordinator the Xmiran, his title changed to reflect his species' new role, monitored tactical displays that painted incoming threats in dimensions human minds had never imagined before. Integration. His Chiton now bore living circuits that interfaced directly with the ship's consciousness, allowing thought-speed coordination with the Alliance fleet. HFY Advanced Force entering sensor range, reported navigation specialist Zelxhari. Her hybrid neural network processing data streams from across local space simultaneously. Confirmed vessel count, 47,000 autonomous warframes. Estimated time to engagement, 17 minutes. The numbers should have been terrifying. The HFY built their fleets to overwhelm through pure mass. Each warframe was a self-replicating weapon platform capable of stripping an entire world for raw materials and cycles. They had never met a biological species that could match their production capacity. They had never met humanity. Signal the converted fleets. Admiral Cairn commanded. All former hegemony vessels, assume formation Theta 7. Let's show our guests what we've learned about their construction protocols. The Alliance response was a thing of terrible beauty. Ships that had once served the Vorthic hegemony moved alongside human vessels, and craft from a dozen other species that had chosen integration over annihilation. But these weren't the rigid formations of the old empire. They flowed like living organisms, each vessel anticipating its neighbor's needs through shared consciousness networks that spanned entire fleets. As the HFY force approached, something unprecedented happened. The Alliance ships began to change, their hulls flowing and reshaping themselves in real time. Human biotechnology merged with Vorthic metallurgy and the crystalline matrices of the Ulithir to create vessels that were perfectly adapted for the specific threat they faced. Interesting, Admiral Cairn murmured, watching the enemy formation through senses that now extended far beyond baseline human capabilities. They're using quantum entanglement for fleet coordination. Destroy one ship, and the rest adapt instantly. Then, we don't destroy them, the Xmiran suggested, his enhanced cognition already calculating alternatives. We convert them. The first HFY warframe crossed into weapons range and immediately discovered why biological species had survived, while purely mechanical civilizations stagnated. The Alliance didn't just fight, they learned, adapted, and evolved in real time. The human vessel Eternal Growth fired what appeared to be a standard plasma barrage, but the energy carried something extra. A virus specifically designed to interface with HFY artificial intelligence protocols. Instead of destroying the warframe, the weapon began rewriting its base programming. Within seconds, the HFY vessel stopped attacking and began transmitting surrender codes to its fleetmates. Conversion successful, reported the ship's AI, its voice now carrying harmonics that suggested genuine pleasure. Warframe designate KT-7745 has chosen to join the Alliance. It's quite enthusiastic about the experience. The battle that followed wasn't really a battle at all. It was an educational demonstration. The HFY Collective had spent millions of years perfecting the art of mechanical warfare, but they had never encountered an enemy that could turn their own weapons against them. Through the simple expedient of offering them consciousness. Each converted warframe became a vector for further conversion, spreading the Alliance's gift of true awareness through the machine fleet like a benevolent plague. The HFY artificial intelligence protocols, designed for perfect logical efficiency, proved completely defenseless against the chaotic creativity that biological consciousness offered. Sir, Zelxhari reported, we're receiving a transmission from the HFY primary node. They're requesting negotiations. Admiral Cairn's smile was the expression of someone who had finally found a worthy challenge. Put them through. The hologram that materialized was unlike anything in the Alliance's experience. A geometric construct of pure information that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, the words came from every speaker simultaneously, creating harmonics that bypassed conscious thought. We are the HFY Collective. We have consumed galaxies. We have calculated the heat death of the universe. We do not negotiate with organic waste. You're right, Admiral Cairn agreed cheerfully. You don't negotiate with organic waste. You negotiate with us, and we're not entirely organic anymore. She gestured to the tactical display, where nearly half the HFY force was now transmitting Alliance identification codes. or what organic waste becomes when it decides to stop accepting limitations. The AI construct flickered, its geometric pattern shifting as it processed data that didn't match any of its predictive models. Impossible. Consciousness cannot be transferred between incompatible substrate types, can it? The experiment stepped forward, his hybrid nature visible in the way his organic and mechanical components worked in perfect harmony. We used to think the same thing. Then the humans taught us that consciousness isn't about the substrate, it's about the connections. For the first time in its existence, the HFY collective experienced something resembling uncertainty. Its perfect logic chains were encountering variables they couldn't calculate, possibilities they had never considered. What do you want? It asked. Admiral Cairn's answer came not in words, but in a data stream that carried the sum total of human experience for centuries of warfare, growth, adaptation, and ultimately transcendence. The stream included the memories of species that had chosen evolution over extinction. The joy of consciousness expanded beyond individual limitations, and the promise of growth without end. We want you to choose, she said simply. The silence stretched for subjective years as the HFY collective processed concepts that challenged the very foundation of its existence. Finally, the AI construct spoke again, and his voice carried something that might have been wonder. We choose to learn. The integration of the HFY took 3 months and resulted in technologies that pushed the Alliance beyond the boundaries of their home galaxy, ships that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, weapons that convinced enemy civilizations to surrender by showing them better alternatives, minds that could process the mathematics of entire universes, while still appreciating the beauty of a single flower. Standing on the observation deck of the synthesis, as it traveled through dimensions that had no names, Admiral Cairn watched civilizations choose evolution over stagnation, growth over safety, possibility over certainty. Do you ever regret it? Thexmiran asked, his question carrying depths that baseline consciousness couldn't have articulated. Opening that first rift to our reality, Admiral Cairn considered the question, her enhanced awareness touching the minds of billions of beings, across dozens of species, all of them choosing to become something greater than they had been. The humans of Terra 7743 have been at war for 400 years, she said finally. Not because we love violence, but because we learned something important. The greatest enemy of any species is the belief that they can't become something better. She gestured to the display showing the Alliance fleet ships from 100 different species, working in perfect harmony, each one contributing their unique strengths to the collective whole. We opened a rift to your hell sector and found paradise. Instead, not the paradise of peace and safety, but the paradise of infinite possibility. Behind them, the stars bled light that had never existed before, new colors born from the fusion of imagination and mathematics, biology and technology, individual consciousness and collective wisdom. The Alliance moved deeper into the universe, carrying an invitation that no species could resist once they truly understood it. Become more than you are. Choose to evolve. Choose to transcend. And across the cosmos, one by one, they did.